You want to use the things that you practice, and if your scale exercises are already solid vocabulary or solid licks, then that's of course a lot easier. Practicing scales shouldn't be just dry, technical and boring. What you work on should really connect with what you want to play in your solos and be more than just moving your fingers. So let's have a look at some great examples of exercises that are really just instant bebop vocabulary. This is an important exercise. In my experience, the best way to practice arpeggios is as diatonic arpeggios in a scale like this. That is of course super useful, but in itself also not that inspiring. Let's add two things that we love about bebop and jazz. Chromatic notes to add some tension and some movement, and interesting rhythms to keep it grooving and alive. First, let's just tweak the rhythm just a little bit. And one way to do that would be to make the rhythm a little bit more energetic by playing the arpeggio as an eighth note triplet. This is something that immediately gives you a lick like this. And since that will work really well in a solo, then you probably also want to practice it through the scale in an exercise like this one. If you work on this exercise, then you can use this rhythm on all the chords and arpeggios and in a lot of different places. And it already starts to sound like music when you're just playing the exercise. Another great way to use arpeggios that is instant bebop is combining the triplet with a chromatic leading note. Now, of course, you want to work on this for all the arpeggios, so you take that through the scale like this. And besides sounding like the Charlie Parker and George Benson solos that you've heard, then that also means that you can make licks like this. Here I'm combining the C major 7 with some chromaticism, something that both Parker and Benson do all the time. You can also put it to use on a G7. There are a few things that you want to learn from this example. The arpeggio from the third of the chord is amazing solo material. Here it's B half diminished over G7. Leading notes can sound great on the downbeat, like the E flat on B3 in the second bar, and large intervals in a scale run sound amazing, something that I'm going to return to a little bit later in the video. And all you have to practice is playing the arpeggio as a triplet and add a chromatic leading note before the first note. Before we move on to a great Barry Harris exercise, then don't forget that the descending arpeggio sounds great as well. A simple version without the leading note can give you a great lick like this. The first exercise was something that I learned from Barry Harris when he was giving masterclasses at the conservatory in The Hague. And this next exercise is also from those masterclasses. It is what Barry calls pivot arpeggios and what often is also called octave displacement. But the way Barry shows this exercise really already makes it into practicing building blocks for some great licks.
We're going to take every chord on this scale and we're going to play it straight up, and then we're going to pivot. Maybe you ought to add a note.
The concept is really simple. First you play the arpeggio, and then you end by going down one step in the scale. The second part is the same melody, but now you're moving the phrase down an octave, except for that first note. Let's translate this to the guitar and go over it in an easy key, like F major in the 5th position. I imagine that you can already hear how this just sounds like taking a short bebop lick and moving it around the scale. And actually both the standard way of playing the arpeggio and the pivot version is great as a line. Here is an example of a 2-5-1 in the key of F major. And it's also a solid option for an F major 7 line like this. And as I mentioned, you can also use the unpivoted version as a great way to frame or target a note with an arpeggio, like I'm targeting the third of G minor 7 in this line. And clearly Barry knows his stuff, because the triplet version of this melody also sounds great. Until now, it's been about getting arpeggios to become amazing bebop lines, but you can actually also work on this with some really simple scale exercises. This exercise is just playing the scale in diatonic 6 intervals. A really pretty sound in itself, but not immediately something that sounds like an amazing bebop line. The reason why this doesn't sound like a bebop exercise is that you're playing so many 6 intervals next to each other, so you need to spread them out a bit and add them to something like a scale run. And this is what I used in the previous examples as well. It's a pretty simple concept. If you have a scale melody, then see if you can add an extra note, a 6 below, when you're on a chord tone. In example 14, that was on the root, where I add a low E, and also later on the third E, where I add a low G. And it's a great way to break up scale runs, but it's also a great way to give sort of a dramatic ending to a line, like I did in this example. This approach to making lines is really just another take on a very powerful melodic tool that is a core part of the bebop sound. Octave displacement. When you're using octave displacement in your lines, then you immediately sound so much better. In a way, it's a cure for just running up and down scales and arpeggios. If you want to dig into more of how that works, then check out this video.